Hello and welcome again to the course. Today in this video we'll be covering the Git's foundation, the very basics of Git. So this is going to be one of the very important videos of Git. So make sure you understand each and everything which we talk about here. So stick till the end of the video and get your things cleared. And again, if you have any doubts, any queries, you can leave them in the comment section. And without any further delay, let's get into the basics. I will not be directly moving to commands. I just want to give you some context before directly jumping into the my text editor or terminal. So let's go over to some theoretical aspects that you need to know the context before starting with the commands. Okay, so let's understand first what is a repository. So whenever you are using Git, or you might have often come across repository, right? It is also called as repo. So what does this repository is, so whenever you are making a Git project, you require a repository. That's like you need to, if you do not have this repository, you cannot use the features of Git. Okay, so this is the essential one. Now what does this repository do? So you can consider this repository as collection of files or anything you do. So so let's consider we have a project, a super cool app that we are building. Okay, so this repository will contain all the files, all the images, files, code, everything with that. And what this repository will do, that it will also track these changes. Okay, if I update anything, it will have a track of those. So this will create a history over time. Okay, so how it would look something like this. So this is like a high level overview of a Git repository. So we would have a history like this over time when we are moving into the project. Now okay, let's say 5 days before I fixed a bug, so I can move at this point of time in that repository. So a repository will store all of this thing. It will store your files and everything. And again, whenever you are starting a project and you want to use Git in it, you need to create a repository. Okay, now let's understand the common like the workflow that you need to understand before starting Git. Okay, so this is a repository. We need to create a repository. We'll see in commands in practical, like how to create a repository. But once you create that repository, it creates these three areas. Okay, so it creates this Git repository, but it also creates two other areas for us to work with. So these are not physically, like these are not directories that you have to go, but these are just these areas. I'll talk about them now. So it creates these three areas, namely working directory, staging area, and Git repository. Okay, so how does this work? Okay, let's understand with a simple example. Let's say I am building a website for my own, my own website. Okay, so what do I need? Let's say I created this repository. So then when we create this repository, what would happen? It would create these three areas, as I said: working directory, staging area, and repository. So we have this three boxes just to visualize it. So we have working directory, we have a staging area, and a repository. Okay, these are the three areas. So I would be starting working on the working directory. Okay, so let's say I'm making my website. What would I need? I would need a website.html. Okay, so I'll create a file named this. I created a file called CSS. Since it's an HTML, you need a CSS to that. And then let's say we also added some JavaScript to add some cool effects and everything. Okay, so we are working on this working directory. Let's say we made a landing page. Okay, now let's say we want to add this landing page to a repository. So this repository is like the thing, you need to manually add this to this repository, and this repository is where your history will be committed. This is like the main thing. So initially when you create this repository, it would be empty. So you need to add this thing. Now you cannot add directly to your repository all the files. You need to let them go through a staging area first. Okay, so we have created these three files. Now let's add them to the staging area. Okay, now they are into the staging area, and once they're in the staging area, we can move it to our actual repository. So I moved them to the repository. Now there is a rule, or this thing we do. So whenever we add to the repository, we need to add a message as well, like what was done. So in this thing, what we did, we made a landing page. So these three will be added, and we need to add a message to that, like made a landing page. Okay, similar to that. Let's take one more example. Okay, let's say I want to update the CSS and JavaScript of this file. With the landing page, I wanted to update it a bit. So after 2-3 days, I thought, let's update this landing page. Okay, so I updated in my working directory. Then we need to add that to the staging area, and then we will add in the repository. And in the repository, what we need a message. So I can say updated landing page. This could be any message. It should be meaningful, and we'll talk about this message a bit later, but this is the common workflow that we see. All right, so working directory, staging area, and then repository. Okay, so again, this is the common Git workflow. So whenever I'm starting a project, I would make a Git repository. Then I would create files, make changes to them. I can delete them, whatever I can do with them. Then once I feel okay, I need to add this thing to my repository, what I can do is I can add these changes to the staging area first, and then I can do a commit, or this commit is basically adding it to this repository. Okay, we'll talk about commit later, but this is the workflow that you'll see. So let's start with commands now. Enough of theory. Okay, let's start with the first command, git init. So let's start with the example that we took over here. So what did we do? We made this 3 files, and then we added to the staging area, and then we added to the repository. So let's do this thing only. So what I've done over here is I've made a this is my terminal. You can open the command prompt. If you're on Windows, if you're on Mac, you can open terminal and you can just follow along. So this is my terminal, and over here I've just opened my VS Code over here just to show you things. So I've made a directory, my website, and what we need to do is we need to first initialize the repository. All right, as we see, in order to use Git, we need to initialize this repository. So git init command helps us to create a repository. So now we are over here in the terminal, and we have created this folder. We can now initialize the repository over here. So I'm going to run git init command, and it says it has initialized an empty repository. So as I told you, whenever a repository is created, it creates these 3 areas: working directory, staging area, and the repository. So initially, ideally, this repository would be empty. So that is what it is saying. It is initialized an empty repository. So nothing is there in that repository. Okay, now let's create some files over here. Okay, so this master, what is this? I will let you know later, but you can just follow along after this. So what I'm going to do, I need 3 files. As I said, I need website.html, css, and js. So I'm going to create those files. Let's do touch website.html, website.css, and we need website.js. So I'm creating these 3 files over here. I've created, as you can see. So let's add something in these files. So I'm just gonna do a template for HTML over here, and let's add some CSS as well. Okay, so I've created this thing. Let's do something over here as well, varx. So you don't need to know these things. I'm just doing this for examples. So okay, I've created these 3 files now. Okay, now I've added some things in this. These 3 things are currently in my working directory, like this. So these 3 inside my working directory, that is what I have in my VS Code. Cool. Now what I need to do is I need to add them to the staging area, moving it to this staging area. So how do we add this to a staging area? So we have a command git add and the file name, and that file name will add it to the staging area. So whenever we run git add and the name of the file, it will move that file from the working directory to a staging area. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to do git add, and I can do website.html html. Okay, so I've added that to my things. Okay, so only this website.html is added. Okay, now how do I check what is in the staging area, what is in my working directory, what are the changes? Okay, so there's a command called as git status which will help us do this. So what does git status do? Git status displays the state of the working directory and the staging area, and it lets us know what has been changed and what files aren't being tracked by git. So what we can do is we can run just git status, and I'll explain you over here. Okay, so we did this, right? Git add, so we added this to our staging area. So it is saying that we have a new file into our staging area, website.html, and it also says that these are the two things that are untracked and which are in your working directory and which are not staged yet. Okay, these two files are not staged yet. So what we can do, we can stage them. So let's do git add a website.css. Okay, css, and I can do that, and I can again run git status. So mind it, git status is your friend. So now I can see, okay, these two files have been added, this thing is still here. So okay, let's add this git add website.js. now I added that. I can take a look at git status, and I can see all these three files are into my staging area. So what I've done till now is that I've created this working directory, I've created my repository, I've added three files, website.html, css and js. Now what I've done is one by one I've moved them to the staging area. Okay, so now from the staging area I did some work over this. Let's say I have only this much thing and I've added to the staging area, and I want this three files to be added to my repository, something like this. Okay, so let's add it to the repository, and we also need to provide a message, as we saw, made landing page. Okay, how do we do that? So we come to committing. Okay, so git commit will actually commit changes from staging area to our git repository. So whenever we make a commit, we need to provide a message that describes the changes and updates snapshots in short. So like I said, whenever you are adding something to repository, you need to give some message. Okay, so let's do this. Git commit -m, then the message that you want to write. Okay, let's see the syntax now. So I'm over here, I can see these three files are in my staging area and I want to add them to my repository. So what I'll do is git commit -m made landing page. All right, and these three files have been inserted. Now when I do git status, I won't see anything. It will like nothing on branch. So this is the branch. We'll talk about this. You can ignore this for now, but nothing to commit working tree clean. That means whatever we have in our working directory is there in our repository. So nothing new changes have been made. Everything is good. Okay, let's say I make some changes over here. Okay, let's say I add a div and let's say I do hello world. Okay, if I did this, then this repository, what it does, it just keeps watching for changes. Okay, now I've changed this thing, right? So over here also you can see, we'll talk about this later, but it is pointing me out in some way like something has been changed. Okay, but how do I do this? Like, how do I get this thing? So I can run git status and it shows me this website.html was modified. All right, this file was modified. So again, let's say I want to add this to my staging area. So what I can do is git add website.html. Let's do it clear. So I'm going to do git add website.html. So I've added that file. Again, now I can take a look, git status. It says this website.html is now added to my staging area. Now I can add it to the repository. But let's say before adding to repository, I also wanted to change the CSS of something. Let's say I wanted to give a padding of 20 pixels, so I changed that. I also want to change some JavaScript, like let's say created another variable. So I changed these files. Okay, these are the random changes I'm doing. But let's say I also wanted to add this thing. So what I can do is I can add multiple files together. So I can do git add website.css as well as website.js. So I'm adding two files together. All right, I can do that, and now I can run git status again to just cross verify these things. So these three files are now added to my staging area. Okay, let's commit these files with the message. So git commit -m updated landing page. All right, and there you go, I've committed these things. So I can have a git status again, and it says nothing to commit. So this is what a common workflow is. You make some changes, then you feel like, okay, it's time to commit, then you make a commit. Now let's talk about git logs. Okay, so I was saying this repository is tracking our changes. It is creating this history over time. So how do I check this history? Okay, how do I check this history? Whatever commits I've made, how many commits I've made, how do I check this? So git log helps us to read history and commits of everything within a repository. So let's consider the example of a repository that we were working with. Okay, so over here I've made two commits. If you know, I've made it updated landing page and made landing page. These were the two commits that I've made. I want to check them, so I can run git log, and it will log me all the changes. All right, so I can see that updated landing page, this was a commit, and I can also say this made landing page. These are the two commits. What is this thing, this whole thing? What is this head master? We're going to talk about that as well. But what does it do? It just takes this message, it is displaying us, it is also telling us by whom this change was made, and it will also tell us about the date when it was committed. So these are the logs. Let's make so this is thing. Now you can end this by pressing Q. You can exit out of this by pressing Q. So I press Q and I got out. Let's make another commit. Let's do some more changes over here. Let's say I make a super cool, and I can do something like background color, let's do black. All right, so I just made these changes, and I'm now going to do this git add website.css. I'm going to take a look at git status, and then what I will do, I will commit this git commit -m added black background color. All right, now this is added. Now I can do git log, and I can see, okay, added a black background color. I can see that, and I can also see the date when it was committed. I can see these things, I'll talk about that later. But yes, this is how you can check your history, which has been built over time. Now there are certain things over here that you do not want to add to the repository. There are certain things, so how do you ignore them? So let's talk about this git ignore thing. Okay, because there are many cases where you do not want to add those things to your repository, because these things might be confidential, or they might be secret, or they might be a secret API keys that you have. There might be dependencies or package if you have ever worked with the node modules in React, and so these things are not necessary to be added to a Git repository. So we need some way to ignore this file. We do not want to add this to our repository. So this .gitignore helps us to do that. Okay, so using a .gitignore, we can tell Git about the files and directories we want to ignore that is not included in the repository commit. Let's understand this with an example. So I'm going to again take the example of this old example. So let's say I am creating this. Let's say I'm creating a secret dot env. This is an extension, but suppose this is my secret, so I'm gonna say my secret, that is equal to this is secret. Okay, I do not want to add this. Okay, I don't want to track this file because this is something my secret. So now if I do a git status over here, I would see that this secret.env is been tracked by Git. Okay, it is saying that you have created this file and there are some changes and you need to add to the staging area, but we do not want to add this. So what we can do is we can create a .gitignore file. All right, let's do .gitignore file. Okay, this is a gitignore file, and this is a file where we can add the name of the files which we want to ignore. So this is secret.env I want to ignore, so I can do secret. I have to type it properly, env. I can just save this, and now if I run git status, it will add, like, the gitignore is added. Obviously we added this file, so it is only tracking this. It is not tracking this because the Git is now ignoring that file because that is our secret and that we do not want to add to our repository. Okay, and now when I do a git add git status, I can see just this new gitignore file was added and this secret.env was ignored, and I can do git commit -m, and I can say added git ignore. All right, and I can take a status and I can see nothing to commit, and then I can do a git log to see all this thing. Now there's one more way to see this because this is kind of like a lot of information. If I just want to see the commits, what I can do is I can do git log --one line, which will just show me the commit messages. So I made the landing page first, then I updated this landing page, then I added a black background, then I added this git ignore. All right, cool, lot of it, right? So I also wanted to talk about git commit in a little bit detail now. So this commit, what you can see when we make this commit, when we add things to a repository, we need to pass a message to this commit as well. So let's understand what is this commit in detail. Okay, so let's say we made some changes and we are now adding it to a repository, and when we are adding to the repository, we need to make a commit, and we also need to make a commit message. So this made a super cool app is our commit message. Now this commit will consist of three things. One is this is the commit hash. So this is a unique for every commit that you make. So as you can see, these are the commit hashes which I was talking about. These are unique for every commit that you make. Now this commit also has author, date, and message, as we saw. All this metadata it also stores, and then this commit also stores the hash of previous commit hash, so the commit which was made before this. All right, so let's consider an example. Okay, let's say these are the three commits that we made. A project setup, then we made about, then we fixed a typo. Okay, these are the three commits I made. So how this would look like? Okay, so first thing, it would have its own okay, let's consider this commit. So first thing, it would have its own commit hash, as we said, and the commit hash of the previous commit, which is this parent. So as you can see, it is having the commit hash of the previous as well, and its message and metadata. Similarly for this commit, it would have this. So this is how these are linked actually. Okay, so from any commit you can go to the previous commit. This is how it. So the first commit wouldn't have any parent, it would be empty. All right, so guys, that was it for today. This was the basics, these were the foundations added to the repository. This might be confusing or little overwhelming at start, but trust me, these are very simple things. Once you practice this, once you do use these commands, it will automatically come to your mind. You don't even have to remember this. I still remember, I used to remember all these commands, but once you use this into your day-to-day life, these commands will automatically come into your mind. So don't worry about memorizing the commands, just worry about how you understand, and take it slow. And I hopefully you understand this. If you didn't understand, if you have any kind of queries, leave them in comment section. And also I would advise you to look back to the video once or twice if you don't understand anything. But that's it for my side for the Git basics. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one.